Welcome, everyone. Glad everybody could join in here. Hopefully, everybody's having a fantastic Friday. But we just wanted to, on behalf of Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, we'd like to thank you for joining today's webinar. It's titled Insider's Peek, Update on Amendment 4 in the Florida Legislature. We're going to be hearing from Susan Glickman. She's the Florida Director for the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, as well as Richard Pinsky, who's currently representing the Florida Solar Energy Industries Association in Tallahassee. My name is Alyssa Schaefer, and I'm the Solar Communications and Policy Manager for the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy. For those of you not familiar with Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, we're a nonprofit organization that promotes responsible energy choices that work to address the impacts of global climate change and ensure clean, safe, and healthy communities throughout the Southeast. We are a membership organization, and we would like to acknowledge our members on this call and also encourage those of you who are not members to please join us today. For ways that you can become a member and get more involved, you can visit our website at www.cleanenergy.org. Before we hand this over to Susan and Richard, we want to just take a moment to review the basic functions of the WebEx control panel, which you should see on the right hand of your screen. To ensure sound quality, all attendee lines will be muted throughout the presentation. Go ahead and find the 3 buttons along the top of your control panel. And if you're having any trouble hearing or seeing the slides, you can click the blue chat button to type in your problem or your question, and we'll help you troubleshoot so that you're able to participate in the webinar with no issues. We expect the webinar to be about 30 minutes and have saved time at the end of the presentation to answer any questions that you may have about today's topic. At any point throughout the webinar, you can feel free to send us a question, and then we'll try to get through as many that we have time for in the order that they come through. To ask a question, all you need to do is click the question mark button along the top of your screen. Make sure all panelists is showing up in the drop-down menu, and then type your question into the questions text box. We will do our best to answer questions in the order we receive them. Like I mentioned, we're going to try and keep this to about 30 minutes. And if your question doesn't get addressed or answered for some reason, we will do our best to follow up with you after this webinar. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our first panelist today, Susan Glickman, Florida Director for the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy. Susan?
Great. Thank you very much, Alyssa, and I appreciate everybody taking the time on Friday to join us and get brought up to date about what's going on up in the Florida legislature in regard to the implementation of Amendment 4. And I think we've got a pretty informed group on the phone, but just to bring everybody to the same place, in 2006, last year in the Florida legislature, they unanimously approved a ballot measure that went on the August primary ballot, which voters approved by 73%, that would ultimately reduce barriers to solar by eliminating certain taxes. Currently in Florida, we have an abatement from residential real property taxes, and Amendment 4 expands that to include commercial. And additionally, it will abate the tangible personal property taxes. So that's going to reduce the cost of solar, and that's a good thing. And as we know, the cost of solar is already coming down, so that's going to help see solar proliferate around the state of Florida. So in order to be enacted, the amendment has to be implemented by the Florida legislature. And we are hoping for a clean implementation of Amendment 4 that really respects the will of the voters to remove barriers and not to have any additional barriers added in this process. So there is a clean implementation bill that has been filed, Senate Bill 90 by Senator Jeff Brandes, who happens to be my state senator, and was one of the 2, sponsors, prime sponsors of the legislation. And so then we also have House Bill 1351, and we're going to talk a little bit about those two bills and where they're at. House Bill 1351 does have some troubling language in it that we are a little bit concerned about adding either duplicative or needless regulations that will construct further barriers to solar. And we're going to get into that a little bit more. I'm joined by Richard Pinsky, who is the lobbyist for the Florida Solar Energy Industries Association, and he's with the Ackerman Law Firm, and I will pass the baton to him in just a minute. I'm going to just go through sort of where the bills are at. Senator Brandes filed his bill actually back in December, and it has gone through the Senate Energy Committee called the Communications, Energy, and Public Utilities, and then it also passed favorably at the Community Affairs Committee. So it is in waiting for its next committee. And the next thing that the bill will deal with is what's known as the fiscal note on the bill. So when they abate taxes on solar, then those are taxes that won't go to the communities in which they are located, and so they have to account for that in the budget. So they give it a fiscal note. And so the next stop in the Senate will be the Appropriations Subcommittee on Finance and Tax. And then after it goes through that committee, it will then go to the full Appropriations Committee. So we do have that sort of hurdle left to get through in the process. So on the House side, the House bill actually wasn't introduced or filed until the night before session. And so we've been all kind of wrapping our arms around the language in the bill, because there are a number of new disclosure requirements and a section that gives sort of broad authority to both the Public Service Commission and then to local utilities in which the systems are located to add standards on. And I know Richard is going to talk a little bit more about, where this bill was drawn and how it approaches regulation, which actually is different than we've done traditionally in Florida. So that bill has passed through the Energy and Utilities Subcommittee in the House, and it is waiting to get a stop in the Ways and Means Committee. So just like on the Senate side, the bill has to go through being approved, and they're going to be looking at that fiscal note and what the abatement is going to actually sort of cost in terms of reduced taxes. And then after that, it'll go to the Commerce Committee. The Energy and Utility Committee in the House happens to be a subcommittee, and it's a subcommittee of Commerce. So that'll be the final stop before the bill would go on to the floor. And then it goes and is voted on in the full House and the full Senate, and at some point those two bills have to be reconciled. So probably one of the most important things to understand is that we have bills working their way through the process, but they are different. The House bill has some language that is concerning, and Richard's going to talk about that a little bit more in a moment, and those two bills do need to get reconciled. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Richard Pinsky, and then I'll take the baton back and talk a little bit about what each of you all can do to help this along in the process. So, Richard?
Okay. Thank you, Susan. If you don't mind, I would like to go back on just a little bit of how we got to where we are, and I do want to thank you and everyone for the opportunity to participate. This is exciting that we've got so many folks on the phone and are interested and ready to go. This legislation and what the voters voted for, and I want, just so we're all clear, and that is a tax abatement. So when you want to put a solar system on your roof at home or now on your business, the property appraiser can no longer come along and say, hey, Susan, nice solar system, really nice. You've actually increased the value of your property. And then on your next tax bill would reflect a little bump and a higher tax that you're paying on your property taxes as a result. So what Amendment 4 did was to basically say, no property appraiser, you can't do that. We don't want you to do that. We don't want you to increase the value of anybody's property, commercial or residential, just because they put a solar system on their roof. Now, that historically has been in the Florida Constitution since 1970. We had a tax abatement from property increase for solar systems since 1970. It was renewed in 1980. It was renewed in 1990. It was not renewed in 2000. So in 2010, it did go back on the ballot, but for residential only. And so that passed, but the legislature, and they have that prerogative now as well, did not implement it. Even though it was in the Constitution, it was up to the legislature to develop the rules of how that would get done, what did the system look like, et cetera. So that didn't pass in 2011, didn't pass in 2012. Finally, in 2013, the legislature passed the implementation of that constitutional amendment that passed in 2010. So since that time, we've been trying to get commercial back into the Constitution. And that's what happened on August 31st, 2016. You all and many other Floridians all said, yes, we want to put commercial back in. So now we have, in the Constitution again, the prohibition from property appraisers increasing one's value just because they put a solar system on their business or on their home. Now, just like in 2010 and 2011, the legislature does not have to implement this, but we want them to. So what Susan has been describing to you has been two pieces of legislation that would implement the property appraisers that already are prevented from doing it for residential, so this would prevent property appraisers from doing it for commercial. So there's no fear of residential being back in play. That's already in the Constitution, but this helps commercial, and it helps commercial in many ways. Not just because they're bigger systems and more sophisticated, 1 meg, larger systems that really do increase the value of commercial property. But also, it also says that when you have something in your inventory, and so many businesses around the country are in the business of leasing solar systems, but they don't come into Florida because they have in their inventory all these solar systems ready to be deployed. So Amendment 4 also said, no, we want more commercial entities to come into the state, start leasing solar. We want it everywhere and proliferate everywhere, and we're not going to charge you a tax should you have a solar system in your inventory as well. So this implementation is important because it will finally open the door for solar systems to be put on commercial like never before, and would also allow businesses to come into our state that are in the business like they are in 40 something other states where they lease systems, and makes it very easy for customers, both residential and commercial, to lease systems. So that's why these bills are important. We would like a clean bill, which is Senate Bill 90. Yes, 1351 has some challenges at the moment, hiding under the guise of consumer protection, which are already in the state of Florida. We have licensed people that install systems, and we have a number of consumer protections already in statute. So this is sort of a paper tiger saying that we want to put consumer protections on a tax bill. But we're working through that, and hopefully we'll be successful. So with that, Susan, I hope that helps, and I'll turn it back to you.
Appreciate the leadership that we've seen in the legislature from Senator Brandis and for Senator Rodriguez, for Representative Rodriguez that ushered this through last year. the Speaker of the House, Richard Corcoran, was I think, instrumental in making sure it got through the process. And now we want to make sure that we're honoring the will of the voters. So as Richard said, we do have a few things to work out on the House side, but I think there's already been a willingness signaled to get some compromises. So what you all can do is you can be talking to your legislators, and I think at this point it's my ask and my suggestion is, you know, to make sure, if you don't know, find out who your state representative and who your state senator is, and call them. And call their office, talk to one of their legislative aides, and say, you know, we want to see more solar in the state of Florida. You know, the Florida Public Service Commission gets reporting from the utilities, and in a state with 9 million electricity customers, we only have 11,626 net metered systems. It's less than 0.1%. And I think people, because we're all beginning to see solar around the country and around the world for that matter, and I think people really understand that Florida's woefully behind. So, you know, to take a few minutes and pick up the phone and call them. I mean, you can write a letter, you can drop by their office, that's probably the most effective thing, and make sure, because when the Solar Choice ballot initiative was going on in 2015, some of the activity and the pressure essentially from all this activity and people really, in a sense, demanding solar is a big part of why this got through in the first place and got onto the ballot. So, you know, we need to let people know in the legislature that we care. And so just take a few minutes and pick up the phone. I think it's a positive message at this point, and we want to, you know, respect and enact the will of the voters. And let's make this clean bill happen. So with that, Alyssa, that's sort of what's going on up in Tallahassee, and they need to hear from folks. So I imagine you all have some questions. Alyssa?
Yeah, and thank you, Susan and Richard, very much. That was very helpful. We do have some questions already, but I want to make sure we have it back up on the screen here, the instructions on how to ask a question if you haven't had a chance to yet. But let's go ahead and get started on the first questions that we've had, and we'll get through as many of these as we can. The first question here is for you, Susan, very straightforward. Where can people find their legislators' contact information so that they can do what you just suggested?
Yeah, you can go to the legislative websites, and for the House, it's myfloridahouse.gov. And they have a tab where you can locate your legislator by putting your district in, your zip code in, and you can track it that way. Or go to FL Senate, and that FL Senate will connect right to the House. Back in the old days, I would have said you could find it in the front of your phone book, but I don't think people have phone books anymore. So that's going away. So you'll go to the tab at flsenate.gov. It says Senators, and the drop down is Senate list, and it says Find Your Legislators. And you're just going to go there, and you're going to put your address in, and it's going to tell you exactly who your legislators are. So flsenate.gov, and then right across the top you'll see Home, Senators, Committees. Just tab on Senators, and you'll scroll down. It says Find Your Legislators, and there are district maps there and all kinds of information. You can even, hit on your senator's name. It'll show you where their office is. It'll show you who their staff members are. So information's pretty easy to get. Great,
Thanks,
Alyssa.
Susan. Yeah. Our next question is for Richard. Richard, can you expand a little bit more on why does the amendment need to go through the legislature if it already passed on the ballot?
That is a great question. The actual way in which it is implemented is is a little more detailed, and the legislature is liable and subject, and it has happened before, that when the legislature does not fulfill the will of the people, a lawsuit could actually be brought to say you did not implement the constitutional amendment. But if the legislature tries, and this would certainly constitute trying, then that makes it a little more difficult. If they did never, if a bill was never introduced, then that would be a clear demonstration that the legislature was ignoring the will of the people. So as far as why it has to happen, there was last year, and this is more information you wanted to know, but there was what they call an implementing bill that traveled with the constitutional amendment proposal. So should it pass, it would not have to come back to the legislature. That bill was unable to garner the support because the legislature always likes another look at it. So that bill, which would have been self-implementing, which they attempted to do on the marijuana proposal a couple of years ago, but that bill failed because the legislature wanted to actually have a shot at implementing Amendment 4. Should it pass? It did pass, and so the details as far as the size of the system, when does it kick in, January 1, 2018, 2019, so all those details of how the will of the people should be implemented is why it comes back to the legislature.
Thanks, Richard. Our next question is for Susan. Susan, what happened to House Bill 1411, the House matching bill? This person visited the Capitol last week and was encouraged to seek representative support for this bill.
So House Bill 1411 was filed by Representative Lori Berman, and she was a prime co-sponsor of putting, the Amendment 4 language on, and she's the ranking Democrat on the House Energy Subcommittee, and just sort of very personally committed to seeing more solar and good clean energy policy. So as I mentioned, Senator Brandes had filed Senate Bill 90 back in December, and so as January, and February were sort of ticking by, and the House bill had not been filed, Senator Berman went ahead and filed that bill just to make certain that it would be in the process. But as, and it is identical to Senator Brandes's bill, but the Senator Rodriguez is the House Majority Leader. The legislature operates in a fairly partisan atmosphere, and the Republicans are strongly, significantly in the majority in the House. And so because the Majority Leader, Representative Rodriguez, was the original sponsor, it was sort of a natural for him to sponsor the bill, which he has. And again, we're working through some of the language that we're not as happy with. But so that House Bill 1411 has not been heard. It was not put on an agenda. It will not be heard. The House Energy Sub has had its last committee meeting. So, so we do, again, support, and I think the language of just telling people we want a clean implementation bill of Amendment 4, and again, we don't totally have that just yet, but it's very important for this to pass. So that's it. I mean, I don't want to necessarily call it partisan politics, but this was an identical version, and it's simply not going to be heard. So I think if you just sort of generically voice support for a clean implementation bill, and as I said, 1411 is not going to be the vehicle, but that's where that came from.
Thanks, Susan. The next question here is for Richard. Richard, what does the time frame for Amendment 4 going through the legislature look like? And this is, of course, assuming there are no unexpected delays or lawsuits, things like that.
Okay, thank you. The session in Florida is an annual session. It's a 60-day calendar, meaning it has a start and a finish, unlike other states that have 60 days of session, for example, like Georgia. So ours kicked off on March 7th, and we conclude May 5th. And so if the legislature is unable to pass a bill implementing Amendment 4 by May 5th, then, and absent any special sessions that may occur for various reasons between now and next January, the session in 2018 will be in January because it's an election year. So that 60-day session will go from January to the beginning of March, and that would be the next time that they could take up the implementation of Amendment 4. Again, when the residential went back into the Constitution, it took not until 2013, 3 sessions later, did it finally get implemented. So we hope it'll happen this session. May 5th is the end, and if it doesn't happen, it won't have another opportunity till next January.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Our next question is for Susan. Susan, I had understood that there may be some effort to coattail third-party solar ownership legislation along with Amendment 4. Can you speak to that?
Yes, there is a bill that Senator Jose Javier Rodriguez has filed that we would consider, more traditional third-party sales. In fact, Richard has been principally involved in this. So it would change the definition right now. If you sell or even give away even 1 kilowatt of energy, you're defined as a utility. And you can't, as we all know, Florida is one of only 4 states where the law expressly prohibits anyone other than your assigned utility from selling electricity. So there is a bill that's filed. It's Senate Bill 456 called Public Utilities by Rodriguez. It was temporarily postponed this week. It was on the committee agenda in Communications, Energy, and Public Utilities, and actually it was an interesting debate at the committee meeting itself. I suspect, and I'll throw it over to you, that it is not going to necessarily be passed. Again, you have, I think, everyone knows that investor-owned utilities in Florida have an enormous amount of political clout. They give lots and lots of political contributions and hire, hundreds of lobbyists, spend millions of dollars, and give money and even to the political parties and so forth. So they have enormous influence in what happens and what doesn't happen. And so it was hard to imagine that a bill that would really cut into their into their electricity sales by exempting certain producers of renewable energy from being defined as a utility. So it was actually a good thing that it got a hearing and a robust discussion as the energy landscape changes, but I suspect that's not going to make it through the process this year. And Richard, if you think something different, let me know. And we would want to keep the implementation of Amendment 4 clean so that it has the best chance of passing. So once you put something else on the bill, tack something else on, then it just makes the job much more difficult, especially something that's very controversial. So generally speaking, we think that the implementation of Amendment 4 is not, controversial at any kind of high level. So that's why we're just trying to keep it as clean as we can and move that through and not, add anything on it that's going to cause people to want to aim at it or kill it. So, Richard, do you want to add anything else about Senate Bill 456?
Just very briefly, they're 2 separate bills. They are not connected, and you will hear more about the opportunity. Let's say you have a 28-unit condominium, and you wanted to put a solar device on the roof, and give away, sell, provide some of that solar energy to each unit owner to offset their electric cost, you would be called a public utility. So this is a simple concept of basically 2 sentences that says if it's on your own property, 2 people on your own property, and you own the unit, you can do that without being a public utility. The shopping centers spoke in favor of it. The condominiums, the apartment buildings, farms, this is going to gain momentum next year, January. You will see this come back again, but this has nothing to do with the implementation of Amendment 4, but it's a wonderful concept that is hopefully going to gain momentum for next year.
Thank you, Susan and Richard. All right, we're right at 12:31 now, but I have one last question that we're going to try and squeeze in here, and then we'll wrap up for today. Okay, last question here, and Richard, if you want to talk to this, and Susan, you can chime in as well. There's a reference in the House Bill 1351 legislative packet that, quote, this provision may be interpreted to require interconnection by buyers or lessees who might otherwise wish to be off-grid, end quote. Can you talk a little bit about this amendment and whether that would be likely to stay in House Bill 1351?
This is Richard. Likely not to stay in, along with all the other onerous, ridiculous provisions. I don't know anybody in the state of Florida that is off the grid. Maybe Trapper John deep in the Everglades, but it is a misrepresentation by the utilities that somehow rooftop solar is going to shut down the grid, and it is the precursor to wanting everybody to, in addition to the investment of their own rooftop solar, commercial or residential, to now also pay for an additional connection even though you're already connected. So it's just one more sneaky way of trying to frustrate solar implementation and devices being installed all over. So I wouldn't worry about that one too much. That is definitely going to be coming out.
Okay, thanks. And since we're at 12:32 here, we are going to go ahead and wrap up for today. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us and for all of your thoughtful questions. Today's presentation has been recorded and will be available on the webinar archive page of cleanenergy.org within the next few days here. We will also send you a link to that recording once it has been processed. If you enjoyed today's presentation, please do consider joining SACE so that we can continue to work toward clean energy solutions for the Southeast. You can visit cleanenergy.org for info on how to join and become involved. And thanks again, everyone. And just to reiterate one more time what Susan was mentioning, look up and find out who your representative and senator is, and feel free to reach out to them and ask for a clean implementation of Amendment 4. Thank you so much, and everybody have a fantastic weekend.